even though only 2 months passed of 2021, there were already a couple of very interesting games played online between the elite chess grandmasters. One of those is Jan Krzysztof Duda versus Daniil Dubov, both very young players who like showing some entertaining chess over the board. And the game you are about to see was played in the Opera Euro Rapid held by Chess24. This was the qualification tournament, and the important piece of information is that Jan Krzysztof Duda, the Polish chess grandmaster, had to win the game in order to qualify for the final sessions, for the most important games. So he was in a must-win situation, playing against Dubov, who is known for very creative chess, for great attacking skills. So let's see how the game went. There was d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, c6, e3, knight bd7, bishop d3, so they both transposed to the so-called Meran variation of the Slav. Pawn takes c4, bishop takes c4, b5, bishop d3, bishop b7, all of this is theory. Castles, a6, e4, c5, even though it looks like both players are slowly approaching the middle game, believe me or not, thousands of games were played in this position. Maybe not thousands, but I have found at least a couple of hundred, I believe. So e5 was played in this position. The other move is d5. Both moves lead to very sharp play. Eventually, black is expected to equalize. However, after knight d5, Duda chose to play a very interesting move, knight g5. It's already quite clear that he's not hiding his intentions. He's going to try to go for the immediate attack on the king, taking advantage of the fact that the black king is still in the center. It's not really well protected, and until it castles, there may be some attacking prospects for white. So here Dubov responded with knight takes c3, which is still a move which is very normal, b takes c3, and bishop e7. And again, I'm not really interested, and I'm not even in a position to make this video an opening survey. It's not really the point. But the move that Duda played in this position, according to my knowledge, this is a novelty. This was not played before. It hasn't been played before, and neither in classical games nor in the internet. Perhaps there has been some games between the engines, but I just couldn't find them. So for the sake of this video, let's just assume this was a novelty. I don't believe this was opening preparation, or maybe this was, but it wasn't for sure based on any previous games. So here Duda just went for sacrifice. Knight takes e6. Black is forced to take on e6. Queen h5. This is the follow-up. It's not that black gets checkmated or anything like that, but it's already getting pretty intense, pretty difficult for black to make the next moves. And as usual, whenever you're defending, it's well, the attacker has a much easier task. The attacker can still allow himself to make a couple of moves that are not necessarily the most precise ones, and the defender, he has to play, well, often the only moves that do not lose on spot. So here it looks like Dubov made the first inaccuracy. He was supposed to play king f8, but it's also sort of counterintuitive because the king is then placed on an open file, and it feels like f4, f5 is going to be a very fast idea, just opening the f file, bringing more resources, in particular the rook standing currently on the f file. So it probably felt sort of unnatural for Dubov to play like that, and instead he opted for g6, probably hoping that Duda is just going to be happy with capturing the rook after h takes g6, queen takes h8. That is the shortest way for white to take the sacrificed material back. Of course, white has a rook, black has minor pieces, and black also has a king which is vulnerable, but I believe that after knight f8 it is actually black who should prevail in long run, there is already some sort of pressure on the pawn on g2. Queen d5 is going to be played, and then we can expect queenside castle. If all of those moves are played by black, black is going to be just fine. So, of course, Duda wasn't satisfied with this. He had to go for the initiative for the long run attack. So queen takes g6 was played, king f8, bishop h6, rook takes h6, queen takes h6. And now it's again quite visible that, well, this game is not going to be standard, and even the material balance is just very strange. So after king g8, which was more or less forced, king f7 was also technically possible, but king g8 feels a bit safer. There was queen g6 check, king h8, and after a little repetition of moves, Duda captured another pawn. So this is the right moment probably to stop. So white has a rook and 4 pawns for 3 minor pieces. You often get a queen for 3, well, not really often, but you sometimes get a queen for 3 minor pieces. And then there's a question, what is more important, whether the queen because it's such a powerful piece, or the minor pieces because they simply outnumber the queen. However, this is something that doesn't really happen too often. So rook plus 4 pawns is not a rook and another rook, it's 4 pawns. How strong are 4 pawns? Technically they're 4 points, but at the same time they're pawns, so we can actually lose one after another, and then your compensation is going to disappear pretty much immediately. But the more important aspect of this position is that Dubov still has a much bigger problem. He still has a king which is completely vulnerable. If he has enough time, if he is given enough time, he will probably be able to consolidate, to bring minor pieces to defense, and then with sufficient time he will probably be able to organize his pieces so that they both protect the black king and also start attacking. However, it's up to Duda whether he gives Dubov this time or not. So after queen takes e6 with a check, black went king g7, and now of course you cannot just expect the queen to do the entire work for you, so you need to bring more resources, you need to invite all of your friends to the party, and therefore rook a to d1 was played, immediately threatening d takes c5 and opening the d file, hitting the knight on d7. So rook a to d1, very dangerous move, and also it's not only about the rook lift, that is, it's not only about opening the d file, it's also about the rook lift, rook d3, rook g3, or rook h3, and then you can see how vulnerable the black king is. But also the rook on d1 may actually support the pawns. If white manages to push those pawns, their value is going to increase with every single step the pawns make. And you're actually about to witness that in the game. So after rook a to d8, there was knight f8, so Dubov challenges the white's queen, and also perhaps knight g6 might be an interesting defensive resource. So there was queen g4 check. Of course, Duda just needs to play in a very forceful fashion. And after king h8, another very quality move, high quality move came, d5. It's really about making black's coordination task much more difficult. If only Dubov had a chance to put the queen on d5 with some counterattacking ideas on g2, using the fact that there is a battery here, then potentially black is just doing fine. And the blockade that could take place on the light squares would really prevent white from getting any reasonable attacking chances. So it's necessary to push the pawn, even at the cost of a pawn. Black is ready to sacrifice the pawn, but at least he will be able to maintain the pressure. As a matter of fact, capturing this pawn is it should be considered suicide, because after bishop takes d5, rook d3, the rook lift, it should be really deadly. So after d5, we already see those two connected passers, and they will be dangerous. So after d5, knight h7, some protection for the king came. There is more resources. However, the pawns start their dance. d6, bishop h4, e6. I'm not sure if you have ever heard of it, but it's an important strategic rule. Whenever you see two connected passed pawns which together have 4 or less pawns to promotion, these two pawns are considered to be at least as strong as a rook. Wow. So it means that virtually Duda currently has 3 rooks. Dubov has only 1 rook, so we can sort of compensate that. So there are 2 rooks for white in exchange for 3 minor pieces and also some extra pawns. So it looks like the material balance has shifted to actually Duda having more material. However, Dubov also improved his piece coordination. So it's a very dynamic game, and it's not really clear who has the advantage. Actually, proper analysis of this game, that really requires a lot of time, and you can consider it well, your homework simply. It's going to be a good training if you take a look at this game and try to stop in a couple of moments and try to determine what's going on. It's not really the point of this video. I really wanted to pay attention to the most important ideas and how you can actually understand why certain moves were played and why certain decisions were made. So at this point, there was queen f6, so Dubov cannot just sit and wait because those pawns are just going to be promoted. So right now he is preparing rook g8, and then you can actually see that black also has certain attacking ideas. There is a possibility to attack the pawn on g2, so it's not that simple for white either. There was e7, so clearly after rook g8 there's going to be an immediate sacrifice, king g8, and then promotion. If that happens on the board, white is, well, going to win that. It's pretty much inevitable. So this wasn't played. Instead, Dubov had to make sure that the pawn on e7 is not going to be promoted. And there was g3, rook g8, queen h5, queen takes c3. Really wild game. Now Dubov is ready to allow queen takes h4, to play queen f3 with checkmate ideas. I cannot really imagine how they both calculated all of this within such a short time control, but it's well, this is really impressive. Also, black may have some ideas with capturing on g3, sacrificing in the material in order to get access to the white king. So for example, if white just wasted the move somehow, you could see bishop takes g3, pawn takes g3, rook takes g3, and after all of those captures, black just wins. So Duda had to be very careful at this point. So after queen takes c3, he came up with this strange sacrifice. Well, it's very logical. When the longer you take a look at it, it gets more and more logical. This bishop is just way too strong. It provides black with tremendous possibilities. So Duda just decided that it is worth more than a rook. Rook d5. Sorry, instead of a3, which was the move that we just made for illustrative purposes. Rook d5, blocking the bishop. Right now, it's much more powerful than the rook, and also it performs a couple of important functions. The bishop on e8 is responsible for covering e8 square, which is actually quite important. So they both exchanged on d5. Again, the material balance completely changed. So Dubov has 2 minor pieces for those 2 extremely powerful pawns, and Duda has a pawn on top of that. So 3 pawns for 2 minor pieces, but those pawns are extremely advanced. So how do you evaluate that? Well, no one really knows. They both knew how to look at this position. So how to evaluate it properly. So here Dubov went knight f6, and I'm not sure what he saw in this position, but Duda, I'm pretty sure he surprised him with the very next move, queen takes g8. And what happens here is that after king takes g8, White just plays d7, and this is absolutely amazing. 2 pawns for a queen. White just has a huge material deficit, but one of those pawns, it will be promoted. It will become a queen, and then tables turn immediately. So after queen takes g8, Dubov just took off the knight, and there came promotion. Bishop f6, queen h5. So the game is, it has slightly slowed down, but just for a second. Queen h5, king g7, rook d1, knight h6. So again, Duda is trying to push this pawn forward. Dubov is mobilizing his pieces to prevent that. It's very logical, but the exact moves, they are quite tricky. It's about the timing and precision in calculation. There was d7, knight f7, queen g4 check, king f8, queen e6, increasing the pressure, also preparing queen e8, and this was an idea that actually this idea actually gives White the chance of promoting the pawn later on. So c4, Black also improves the position of the pawn because it will be important. Passers in endgames, they are generally important. The closer you get to promotion, the more dangerous the pawn is. So there was rook d5, b4. Again, I don't really want to go into details. It's a really messy position. It's really difficult to explain it, but I want to show you one or two more interesting positions where it really got wild. So there was rook f5, putting even more pressure. It looks like Dubov is just about to collapse. But here, with last resources, he played king g7, apparently protecting everything. King g2, sidestepping all of the checks from the back rank. It's quite natural to see some prophylaxis finally at this point. You need to relax a bit when you play such a wild game. He takes b3, and there is a... I'm showing you only the continuations that were played on the board, but actually there were more hidden resources here. For example, it was very easy to blunder like that, because after rook f3, it looks like it's a forcing move. Perhaps it will be possible to win the pawn. On contrary, queen takes f3, king takes f3, knight g5, winning the queen and the game. Of course, Duda spotted that immediately, but if you're not such a great blitz player, if you're basically not such a strong grandmaster, it's really easy to miss those, especially in time travel. So after the exchange, Duda just grabbed the remaining pawn on a6, improving his material balance. Probably he felt like he needed those pawns to make sure that not too many queens are going to be occur on the board. So there was b2, queen b6, and bishop d8, and now massive simplifications took place on the board. I'm not sure if Dubov really needed to go bishop d8, but again, it's the piece coordination is pretty bad for Black, because the queen actually needs to support the bishop. It also should support the pawn on b2. The Black bishop cannot really move because it always needs to take care of the d8 square. Same could be said about the bishop, about the knight, and White still has those passers that could be used later on, h4, g4. So Black actually has a very tricky position. So he went bishop d8, and after this, he was the first to promote. However, this wasn't enough. So queen d8, queen c6, f3, b1 queen, queen e8 check, king g7, queen e5. Duda plays very precisely, just making sure that his king is going to be safe, because even though, well, you can expect the pawn to this on d7 just being promoted in a moment, and then it's about taking care that when Black gets the first check, he's not going to turn it into a checkmate. So really improving, centralizing the queen just to cover more and more squares, this is quite essential here. So after the check, there was king h7, queen h5. This is actually quite helpful, because then the king may find some shelter on h3. King g7, queen g4, one more check, king h6, queen f4, king h5. I'm not really sure how Duda made sure that this is exactly the right way to get this position on the board, that this is the exact setup he wanted it to be, he wanted to see on the board. But after king g6, promotion, queen c2 c2, queen d2 d2, black resigns. So apparently the exchange of queens is pretty much inevitable if Dubov just escapes with the queen, for example, by playing queen c5 just to create more threats. Well, you can still not escape from the exchange, but even without that, I mean, moves like queen h6, it's quite clear that it is black who's going to get checkmated faster, or he's going to lose one of his queens in just a moment. So in any case, the position is just lost. One of my favorite games of 2021 so far. Absolutely impossible to calculate that and to assess it properly with those material imbalances that practically never occur on the board. And this is actually what makes it so fascinating. And those tactical ideas, especially Duda's queen sacrifice, just to have those two pawns on the 7th rank, and you never know which one is going to be promoted, but you know it is going to happen on the board. Fantastic display by those two young grandmasters. They actually both deserved to win that game, but the winner could only be one. It was lucky. Jan Krzysztof Duda was lucky to be the one, but again, Dubov also played a very, very solid game here. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.